All right, we're going to look at this book here, Rosaria Butterfield's The Gospel Comes with a House Key. Is this book any good for urban ministry? So I'm going to talk about some things I liked about the book, talk about some things I wasn't so keen on, and then a kind of conclusion about is it any good for urban ministry. So first off, the book is coming from America. Okay, so a different context to the UK. And I wouldn't really say it's written from the urban perspective. But there are loads of really good things in this book. Like, first off, she makes a really good point and really hammers it home, really gets it across that Christians have got to be loving their neighbours. And she also comes up with loads of practical ways of doing that and shares a lot from her story of how they've helped neighbours out and love their neighbours. And you know, you read it and you're like, if more people would do this, what a better world we would live in. You know, and obviously lots of people do love their neighbours and reach out to their neighbours, and lots of non-Christians love and reach out to their neighbours and that as well. But she makes a point that if you're a Christian, God hasn't got your address wrong, and he's actually put you in a certain place so that you can love the people around you, and that this is part of the gospel. Part of the good news is that his people would be the hands and feet of Jesus. So yeah, lots of really good stuff there. Now let me actually get in proper book mode here. All right, so there are also some beautiful stories in there of some people who became Christians, and part of that was through her showing hospitality to people. When she talks about hospitality, she's talking about everyday hospitality, like having people around for soup and bread as a meal. She's not talking about all that put on a big fancy meal type thing, you know. She's talking about being there for her neighbours when they need help, when they need someone to look after their dog or whatever, you know. Or when someone needs a meal brought to them because they're ill or something like that. There were times where this book was really convicting, where she's saying certain things and you're thinking, oh boy, I should be doing that, you know. And it's admirable how her and her husband live, the lifestyle they have, and how much they emphasize loving their neighbors. There's also a real gem in it. She's talking about, sometimes people are like, how can I love some of my neighbors if I don't approve of what they do? And she also covers the whole topic of, what if you got friends who aren't Christians and they don't approve of you? Which I know as a Christian, I've got friends of mine who aren't Christians and they don't approve of me being a Christian. And she makes the point that you don't need to approve of people to love them. And that in friendships with people, you love your friends, even if you don't approve of everything that they do. And I thought, yeah, that's really true. I mean, you have family members that you don't approve of everything they do or think, but you still love them. And so I thought that was just helpful in this day and age where it's kind of seen as if you don't approve of everything someone says and does, then it's almost as if you kind of like have to cancel them, instead of realizing that, no, friendships and love doesn't really work like that and shouldn't really work like that. So I just thought that was a real gem, and there were a few gems like that along the way where she comes up with some really clever ideas and shares them in quite an easy to understand way. Let me talk about some of the things I didn't like so much about the book, and this might just be because she didn't write it for people like me. She didn't write it for people living on council estates in London, right? But the drug story, like throughout the book, there's this story about a friend of hers who is a drug addict, quote unquote. And every now and then you hear these references to this drug addict and this story. And for me personally, from the context I'm from, it got a bit cringy. If you grew up in a neighborhood where you have friends who are addicted to drugs or friends who sell drugs, you might struggle a bit with that story because a lot is made of it. And the whole time you're thinking, well, surely, Rosaria, you're going to deal with the whole thing of people in your neighborhood having respectable sins, socially acceptable sins that don't get called out, and the whole time it's like, this person who's a drug addict, they're the big sinner. And that was a bit frustrating. So you might cringe at that a bit. Another thing I found a little bit odd was the mention about stay-at-home wives or stay-at-home mums. I don't have a problem with that concept if people choose to do that, but it sounded like, and maybe it's just because at this point I was reading it on audiobook, and sometimes you don't quite take things in right on audiobook, but it sounded like she was getting the idea of being a stay-at-home wife from the Garden of Eden story. And I just don't see how you can get that from the Garden of Eve story. And she, interesting, Rosaria Butterfield, someone who comes from the LGBTQ community and was a feminist scholar, feminist literary scholar. I don't know if those are the exact terms she used, but that basically, I think from what I've heard about her other times, what she said, that's the camp she came out of. At one point she uses the term patriarchy, and I think she's describing what she would call a loving patriarchy. And I think the way she describes it in her book, the way they function as a family, sounds fine. But I'm just a little bit uneasy about that term, because patriarchy is one of those terms that means different things to different people. And there's been a whole bunch of people that say that are basically promoting abusive systems that are patriarchy. And so I just felt that there could have been a bit more on that, maybe, to explain what she means. But I guess the main thing is, if you're in the urban environment, a lot of the stuff she shares, we need more flexibility of how to apply it in our neighborhood. So she talks about having people round pretty much every day of the week in our home. Well, it's not the same in all urban environments, but often a lot of people are finding when they're doing urban ministry that not everyone can do hospitality in their home. Some people, their flats are just too small. You can't have anyone around. Some people haven't got a table to eat at, and so there's that challenge. But there's also the fact that some people don't feel comfortable going into people's homes. In some neighborhoods, people just chat outdoors on the street most of the time. And you can chat to someone on your front door, but as soon as you say to them, do you want to come inside? They'll be like, oh no, I've got to go. So I think that isn't a criticism really of Rosaria's book. She didn't write it for the urban environment, but what that means is those of us in urban environments, we need to work out, okay, are we going to write our books about urban hospitality? Are we going to talk about how we deal with these things? Are we going to talk about the concept of a third place, about doing hospitality in a third place where it's not your home, but it's somewhere that people feel comfortable to come to, and where everyone is equipped to do hospitality? So there's things we've had to do in our church where come up with ways so that everyone can be involved in hospitality, but it doesn't involve having to have a big house, because not everyone's got a big house. Another thing that came up as I was reading the book was me thinking about disabilities. So a lot of people have got disabilities. In the urban context, you have a lot of people, so particularly on council estates, you have a lot of people with disabilities and with mental health difficulties who aren't getting the support they need. A lot of people living together in a close area, which means we got to have a lot of flexibility when we talk about hospitality. You could end up putting a big burden on someone, making them think that they got to be doing hospitality every day when they need to be doing self-care. Now, Rosaria, in her book, she does talk about how she needs to make sure she gets good quality time with God. But even still, the kind of schedule she talks about, I think for a lot of people, could actually be damaging to their mental health. And so I think a book can only achieve so much, but I would just want to say people got to be careful to make sure they don't take on more than they can actually handle. And then they've got to make sure they take care of themselves so they can take care of other people. And we just want to make sure we don't end up taking the Bible's command to practice hospitality as being too prescriptive about what that hospitality schedule must look like. We've got to be really careful about that, because then it moves into legalism. And so that was just another thing that I thought, it would be helpful if there was more, if there was some stuff written about that, and that it was just nuanced carefully. This is the Urban Ministry Show. I've got to answer the question of, is the book any good for urban ministry? And I'd say it's a good starter. It's a good starter if you want to think about hospitality. There's things in the book. It's one of those books that you'll find yourself agreeing with so much, and then other things feeling like you're kind of getting a bit frustrated and kind of disagreeing and thinking, well, maybe she's right and all that. And that's a good book, right? It's a good book when it gets you challenged like that and thinking about stuff. So it's very thought-provoking. If you're in the urban environment, I think you need to take this book as kind of an ideas maker, but then you've got to do the work for your neighborhood and for your family and your friendship group and everything to then work out, how do I do this there? This will be a book I remember for quite a while. There's some books you read and you kind of forget them. I won't forget this book, and I would say a big well done to Rosaria Butterfield for the book. All right, God bless.